days after the Boston bombing, there was a drone strike in Yemen, one of many, but this one we happen to know about because a young man from the village that was hit testified before the Senate a couple of days later and described it right at the same time. And what he said is interesting and relevant. He said that his village, which is isolated, they were trying to kill somebody in his village. They said the man was perfectly well known. They could have apprehended him if they wanted. He was a drone strike is a terror weapon. We don't talk about it that way, but it is. Just imagine if you're walking down the street and you don't know whether in 5 minutes there's going to be an explosion across the street and from some place way up in the sky that you can't see, and somebody will be killed, and whoever else is around will be killed, and maybe you'll be injured if you're there. That just is a terror weapon. It terrorizes villages, regions, huge areas. In fact, it's the most massive terror campaign going on by a long shot. And what happened in the village is that, according to the testimony, Senate testimony, that he said that the jihadis had been trying for years to turn the villagers against the Americans and had not succeeded. He said in one drone strike, they turned the entire village against the Americans. That's maybe a couple hundred new people who we'll call terrorists if they take revenge. It's a terror-generating machine. It's a terrorist operation and a terrorist-generating machine. So it goes on and on. That's not just the drone strikes, also the special forces and so on. Well, that was right at the time of the Boston Marathon, and it's just one of innumerable cases. And it is more than that. The man who was targeted for whatever reason they had to target him, first of all, that's just murder. There are principles going back 800 years to Magna Carta holding that people cannot be punished by the state without being sentenced by a speedy trial of peers. That's only 800 years old. They have various excuses, but I don't think they really apply.
Speaking of the drone wars, I can't help but think of John Bellinger, the chief architect of the drone policy, who was speaking to a think tank recently, and he said that Obama's ramped up the drone killings simply to avoid the bad press of Gitmo, of capturing suspects alive and trying them at Gitmo. When you hear things like this, what is your response to people who say his hands are tied, he wants to do well?
Well, that's actually was pointed out some time ago by a Wall Street Journal military correspondent. What he pointed out is that Bush's technique was to capture people and torture them. Obama's improved it. You just kill them and anybody else who's around. It's not that his hands are tied. That's a much more, it's bad enough to capture them and torture them, but just murder on executive whim. And as I say, it's not just murdering the suspect, it's a terror weapon, terrorizes everyone else.
Right.
So it's not that anyone's hands are tied, that's what he wants to do.
I'd rather be detained indefinitely than be blown up as well as my family and friends around me.
Yeah, and that terrorizes everyone else. And there are recent polls which show that of Arab public opinion, the results are kind of interesting. The Arabs don't particularly like Iran, but they don't regard it as a threat. It's ranked very low. They do see threats in Egypt and Iraq and Yemen. The United States is the major threat. The policy of murdering people instead of capturing them and torturing them can be presented to the public in a way that makes it look clean. It's presented, and I think most people see it this way, as a kind of a surgical strike which goes after people who are planning to do us harm. And this is a very frightened country, terrified country, has been for a long time. So if anybody's going to do us harm, it's fine for us to kill them. And some of the reactions are, how this is interpreted is quite interesting. For example, there was a case about a year or two ago when a drone attack in Yemen killed a couple of little girls. And there was a discussion but with a well-known liberal columnist, Joe Klein, I think he writes for Time. He was asked what he thought about this, and he said something like, it's better that 4 of them are killed than 4 little girls here. So because, I mean, the logic is mind-boggling, but if we have to kill people elsewhere who might conceivably have aimed to harm us, and it happens that a couple of little girls get killed too, that's fine. We're entitled to do that. I mean, suppose any country was doing that to us, or to anyone we regard as a human. It's incredible.